Hey everyone, today I want to talk about a concept that matters a lot more in live mixed games these days than it ever did in the past. And that is something that I have gotten pretty good at just through repetition and practice, which is keeping track of the size of the pot and learning to quickly calculate a pot-sized bet or raise in live mixed games. This comes up a lot because these days there are a lot more pot limit mixed games than there ever were before, and obviously we also play a lot of pot limit Omaha, PLO 8 or better, Big O, any sort of pot limit cap game. So I thought I would spend a little bit of time today talking to you guys about how I do this at the live table, how you can practice this skill, and how you can get better at it. So I would divide this into two main areas. One is dealing with pre-flop, and then the other is every other street. So let's start with talking about pre-flop and calculating pot-sized raises. So the first thing to know is that in any mixed game that I've ever played in, and almost any mixed game live that I've ever seen, including tournaments and including cash, if there is an ante in the game, it does not count towards the size of the pot pre-flop. Otherwise, it makes it so that a pot-sized open can be way, way, way larger if there's an ante in the game. So typically the ante is ignored pre-flop, but not ignored and included in the size of the total pot post-flop. So that is one important thing to think about. So the advice I would give you guys for understanding how to think about pot-sized raises and re-raises pre-flop in any sort of a live game is this. Just first calculate how much is the maximum you can open given the blinds, right? So if we take a typical example of $10 and $20 blinds, again, it doesn't matter if there's an ante in there, but let's say that there is a $20 big blind ante. This is going to be how it would be in a tournament structure, right? If you're playing the 10-20 level with a 20 ante, obviously in tournaments, you'll probably add a couple zeros, but let's just go with this example. You want to be able to calculate from outside of the blinds how much can you open to. Well, the answer is always the same for calculating a maximum amount you can currently raise to preflop. And that is the advice I was given a long, long time ago, which will serve you well. Think about the old Wild Wild West poker games that you've seen in old TV or old movies, and the way that they announce a raise will actually get you to the right answer here. Now, you're not allowed to do this live because this is what we call a string raise, but the thought process is correct for figuring out the pot size raise. Think about like a cowboy saying, I see that bet and I raise you X, right? In this situation, what you're effectively doing is first calculating the pot as if you would call the current bet. So again, let's go back to that example with the $10 and $20 blinds. This will never lead you astray. It folds to you in the cutoff position and you want to make a pot-sized raise. If you think to yourself, okay, if I call the current bet, which is the size of the big blind, that's $20, and I raise now whatever total amount is in the middle, well, how much is in there? Your 20 that you've quote unquote called plus the 20 and the 10 from the two blinds is 20, 40, 50 more. So you can raise 50 more to make it a total of 70. So the biggest size that you can raise to right now is 70. Another way to think about this is 3 times the current bet plus any other money that's already active in the pot. So in this situation, that would be 3 times the big blind plus the small blind. Again, that will get you to 70. But my method of thinking about the old Wild Wild West method of I see that bet and raise you the next will never lead you astray, and it will work no matter what position you're in, what the blinds are, what the action is to you, and we'll come up with an example for facing a raise in a second. Okay, so you can open to a maximum of 70. Let's assume now that someone has made it 70 in front of you, and so you're now in the cutoff position, and the hijack player has already raised it to 70. How much can you raise it to now if you want to raise the maximum? Again, use the same methodology. If you see the 70 first, then how much total money is out there? Your 70 plus his 70 is 140, plus the two blinds is 30 more, 170. So now you can raise 170 more. And this is important. It's more from the current bet. So the total amount that you can raise to is 170 plus 70, 240. And again, you can calculate that the other way too, right? 3 times his current bet of 70 is 210 plus the blinds, that's 30 more. That also gets you to 240. But I really like my methodology of always thinking about seeing the current bet and then raising as much as allowed after that. So hopefully that gives you a way to do it. It'll become second nature if you handle it pre-flop. Now let's talk about post-flop. So the number one tip I can give you guys is always keep track of the pot, even in hands you're not involved in, and your brain will get way faster at this exercise. It's like a little bit of muscle memory. You will get good at it, and you get practice at it, which can be valuable. So now it becomes second nature to you when you're playing. So I always recommend that you keep one number in your mind. Keep the number of the current pot size starting the current street. That will be the easiest way to then sort of recreate any new action and add it to the current number that you already held in your mind. That will also allow you to easily calculate the stack to pot ratio from the current street. So whenever I go to a flop, I always first make sure I know exactly how much is in the pot before I start thinking strategically about the flop texture or my hand or what I want to do. Just take that extra few seconds and make sure you know how much is in the pot. If there was a raise pre-flop, quickly calculate, okay, the guy raised 70, the big blind defended, that's 140, plus the small blind is 150, and oh yeah, there was that $20 ante, now that ante matters. So now all of a sudden the pot has 170. So I take my time, make sure I understand that, and now when I go to the flop action, I'm thinking, okay, 170 in the pot, that's how much money to start. And then from there, you can use the same methodology if you want to calculate any raises on the flop. Like say someone leads into you for 80, and you know there was already 170 in there. Now you can go through the same exercise to figure out what the maximum amount you're allowed to raise to is. Can you guys figure that one out? 80, I see the 80 means now there's 170 in the middle plus my 80 plus his 80. That's 170 plus 160 is 330. So I can make it 330 more on top of his 80. I can raise to a total of 410. And again, you can use the 3x method will also work in the situation. 80 times 3, 240, plus the 170 that was already in there will also get you to 310. So again, that method works, but keep track of one number. Always keep track of the pot size going into the current street. If there's a bet on the flop, now before the turn card comes, just mentally add the one number you started with what was the flop action, right? I had 170 in my mind. A guy bet 80. I called 80. I've now added 160. So now we've gotten up to 330. So now I have one new number in my mind, 330. And that's just how I handle it street by street. I always just keep track of the current pot size starting that street. And then when the dealer's getting ready to deal the next card, I do a little bit of mental arithmetic and figure out the action from the previous street and add it up so that I have one new number. That's the best advice I can give you. It's something that you'll get way better at with practice. And again, do this when you're not involved in the hands. It'll keep you paying attention to the game. It'll keep your brain dialed into calculating the pot size. You can be helpful at the table. You can always kind of have a sense of who knows what's in the pot and who doesn't. You can get a strong sense of who's a good pot limit player from the people that are betting. Like if you think a guy's trying to bet full pot, if they know exactly how much is in there without having to ask, that's probably an indication they're a strong, experienced like live pot limit player and something that you should be paying attention to. Oftentimes, my experience is that people think that they are betting larger than they are. It is very, very common for people to think they're making a big bet and really they're only betting 55% of the pot because they have not done a good job of calculating and they're just sort of estimating based on the amount of chips that they see in the pot. They're like looking at the actual physical chips and they're guessing how much is in there from that. I would highly recommend you try not to pay attention to the actual denominations of the chips and do it from the numbers. Always just think back to the action because that will keep you dialed into the previous action. You won't forget what any of the actions were, and it's just a way more reliable method. If you're trying to look at the size of the pot and quickly like count up the chips that are in there, that's going to lead you astray. So these are my tips for calculating the pot size live and always paying attention and figuring out when how much you can make to a pot size raise. Let me know what questions you have about this. I'm happy to clarify. This is something I got way better at in the last few years as I play a lot more pot limit Omaha, PLO mix games, and things like that. And yeah, let me know what questions you guys have, and I'm happy to cover any more live poker topics like this in the channel on the future. So talk to you guys soon, and thanks very much.